All right, for today's little topic, little lecture, little rant, we're going to discuss inflation and we're going to discuss the Biden student forgiveness that just happened. And I'm going to try to get ahead of this because I know a lot of people are going to say some dumb things about it. But no, I'm just going to discuss these two topics, and here we go. Inflation, under the financial definition, is nothing more than the government printing more money. The government prints more money, therefore there's more money in circulation, and then your dollar becomes less, your purchasing power becomes less. If the printing of the money is within a reasonable amount, it's not noticeable for the most part. I don't know where they get the 3% yearly that they want to do, but the entire point of if the government is legitimate, which it's not, and if the government's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and it's not, the entire idea of why the government should control the money supply at all is the fact that currency, for it to be at its best and most optimal value, needs to be printed to its use. So like in the 80s, there was a huge craze in Japan where everyone was going to arcades. So the Japanese government had to mint more coins in order to keep the arcade systems going. And that didn't hurt their economy. That didn't hurt anything because the money was printed to use. That's the entire point. If there's not enough money in circulation, that's really bad. So if there was only like $1 million, like it's not like each dollar would be worth a lot, but then you wouldn't be able to buy anything. Like it would be much worse, and things would not be as lubricated as they are now in the business industries, and all this trade and stuff would just kind of collapse. If there's too much money, then your purchasing power goes down because again, essentially the American dollar, no matter what anyone might say, left or right, is only backed by American proficiency. Our productivity is what backs the dollar. Technically, right now, it's backing it as oil and violence, because if you don't have a United States dollar as your national treasury, you might get bombed to death. Who knows? But technically, it is oil and violence that backs the dollar. But for the most part, it's still just our productivity. Because we're so productive, our dollar is valuable. And then the whole job of the government is supposed to be to keep the currency printed in such amount as to our use, which is why inflation's at 3%, which I think that's way too high, but that's the reason why inflation is supposed to be at 3%. The reason why we have so many inflation problems right now is because instead of it being 3% a year, the last two presidents, Joe Biden and Trump, both just introduced $4 trillion into the economy and just fucked that idea up of the, hey, 3%, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So when you add that much money in, that's why we have all this inflation, because now there's more money. And then, yeah, if you earn $100 a week, like that's like, oh, that's $100 a week. It's now like you're earning like $75 a week or even less, like actually, because $4 trillion is a lot of how much we spend. Our debt might have been that high, but that debt got cured over, 40 or 50 years or something like that? Like, the debt took a long time to get over this, so it caused a lot of the inflation over the last 20 years, but it was not as aggressive as these last 2 years because, again, $4 trillion is a lot of money. So that's the government's job. That's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to print the money to use. All right, so that's inflation. That's it. Cost of living is a very different beast. Feels the same to the layman, the average consumer, but they are different things. Can be and are caused by different things. One is literally only caused by the printing of money. Now, what I'm going to discuss is that it is potentially, and I'm going to say this, and I mean this, potentially, a net benefit of Joe Biden actually forgiving these student loans. Net benefit for everyone. Before we get to that, first off, what he did was 100% illegal. Our justice system is completely fraudulent, but there are pretend rules in it. Of course, at any time, at any point, any judge can just say hearsay and just fuck you over. So technically the justice system does not exist in any sense of the form because we believe the quote-unquote justice system is there to uphold some kind of moral righteousness, and it's not. It's there to harm you, and it's there to collect money for the government. That is it. But even by the dumb profoundly stupid rules of the United States government, what Joe Biden did was inherently illegal. The only problem is that only a few people can actually, like, no one can sue him. Like, there's no lawyer can sue him for no reason. No, the taxpayer can't sue him because we don't have standing. That's what the United States Supreme Court said in one of the many cases. Forgive me for not knowing that offhand. No one can sue him, and the few people that could sue him are not going to, because it would make it a lot harder for them to get reelected, which is another problem with our justice system. All right, so inherently what he did was illegal. But here, this should ultimately be a net positive for every human being in the United States. And I'm not joking about that. Even the people are all like, well, I paid my student loans off, or like, well, I didn't go to college. It should be a net positive to you. All right. So if you don't know what student loans are, the government just magically writes you a check, which again is money that it magically gets. The government buys debt money from the Federal Reserve at huge rates. So it's just magic money that was not productive. You didn't work for it. Like, you didn't work hard and then you paid taxes. That just magic money in the air, and then sold that money to students. And I haven't looked into it for a long time, but last time I looked into it, I believe 75% of all student loans, like right after they're signed, so like while the kids are still in college, typically 75% of student loans are immediately sold off to debt collectors. Like, you have Great Lakes and other companies like that. And so I don't know how much. I'm sure it's not pennies on the dollar that they're selling this debt off for, because again, these debt collectors can take a $100,000 loan and turn it into $200,000 pretty easily, because, it's a debt you cannot get rid of. So they signed it off for some amount of money, and then the debt collector is the one that collects it from you. So the government made its money already. So even if let's just theoretically pretend it's $1 trillion in student loan debt, and instead of the government getting rid of 10 or 20,000, depending on what it is, of your student debt, they get rid of all of it. So essentially $1 trillion. So as long as they didn't sell the $750 billion they already sold off for pennies on the dollar, the government has made a net money off of it. So even if they forgive it and the quote unquote taxpayer takes $250 billion hit from that forgiven debt, that is still going to be a net positive, because they should have made more than $250 billion off of the other student loans. So just there, the government itself made money off of this deal. The other net benefit is the fact that technically it should cause deflation. It's not going to cause deflation by a lot, but and we're going to talk about this later, if how the government works, and they just force the companies that have these contracts that have debt that cannot leave you until you pay it off or you die, if they just force those guys to take the hit, which is completely reasonable and makes sense, they make a lot of money off this debt, that it would be a net positive, because essentially what happens is you're just disappearing a bunch of the debt, disappearing a bunch of this debt money, and it would deflate the economy. The amount of money in circulation would go down, and we would see a slight relief in inflation. I don't know how much that would be. It wouldn't be that. It wouldn't be like some crazy amount. But I think it would be noticeable. It should be noticeable right away, because it should be a big enough dent that would hit it. It's not kind of hard to offset $4 trillion, and it definitely wouldn't even be $1 trillion. But it would be noticeable, and it would be an immediate relief to the American people. And there will be a group of people who are now debt-free, or at least a section of their debt is taken away, and they'll have more spending money to boost the economy. It should be, technically, viewing it from an objective standpoint, it should just be a net positive all around, other than the people who paid off their student loans and or didn't take student loans out kind of get shafted just a little bit. But I mean, again, the inflation that's causing all your prices to will go down, so that's a net benefit. And I genuinely believe that's how that ought to have worked. The only problem with that is, because I've heard other people discuss it, The only problem with that is I've seen it in the past happen where the government doesn't work the way it ought to work. Things just happen that just fuck the American people when things are going well and good things ought to happen. Like there's a couple times when the debt ceiling wasn't raised and they were going to shut down the country, which means literally nothing. The government just stops doing things. And I was like, no, this is a good thing. Yeah, I was like, yes, some services stop, and maybe welfare people won't get a check for a week or so. Like, there's just some things that are bad, but imagine how many bombs we drop every single day, and that's not going to happen anymore, and all the money we spend just killing people, and all the money that was just burnt, being stolen and robbed from the American taxpayer. And like, you know how inherently good this is? And then when the time came for the government to shut down, it kind of shut down. Really, all the stuff that benefited the lower class and maybe some middle class Americans, just the stuff that benefited the American people got shut down. But the perpetual foreign wars didn't get shut down. I'm like, oh fuck. So that's how it works. Is the fact that the government's always going to do what is best for its benefactors, which is not you and me. It's the giant industrial complexes, the medical and the military and the chemical, and just all those fucking, yeah, they're going to continue to win no matter what, because it's the government, and until you get rid of the government, there ain't gonna be no salvation from this problem. So, like I said, theoretically, it should be a net positive for the American people that this debt got rolled away. But I have seen the government just fucking do some heinous shit. And it, like, that doesn't make any sense. And I think that's what might happen. I'm hoping, because again, I don't know. I mean, this just happened. So maybe I'm misinformed because I don't care enough. But what should happen is that the debt holders of this money, unless there's some kind of like giant portfolio with all this debt, someone that's going to fuck over a bunch of other people elsewhere. But that's a whole other problem with our financial systems being controlled by the government. The debt should just, like, they should make the people that have these loans that cannot go away, and they should just automatically be like, hey, just get rid of that. And then if that happened, the American people would be in a net positive. But the problem is that these people have lobbied and are so successfully tied together with the United States federal government that logically that's probably not going to happen. And I've heard this discussed by a few people, especially by Robert Barnes. He was talking about it yesterday in his live stream about how what's going to happen is that the banks and the debt collectors are going to like roll back, and they're basically going to charge the American taxpayer for the money that's lost, which would be that would be a bad thing, because all that means is that instead of our money, quote unquote, going towards roads and all this other shit, which it doesn't go to, essentially what would happen is that you paid $20,000 off of my visual communication design degree. That's what happened. And that's not a good thing. That's not an inherently good thing. So that's that. Right now we're at speculation because, again, this is kind of unprecedented. It is unprecedented. It's highly illegal. But the thing is, it technically shouldn't hurt anything. That is, and it should not hurt anyone or anything unless, of course, the government if the government says, "Hey, those guys you have to forgive it. You have to write it off." And what they'd probably do is they'd probably just write it off and get a tax break, so they wouldn't pay taxes in the next couple of years, maybe the next 5 years. For how much? Because that's gonna $20,000 per person, even $10,000 per person is still a lot, but it could be up to $20,000 per person. And there's how many millions? Tens of twenties of thirties of millions of people with student loan debt still. Like, it's a lot. It's a lot. So, yeah. So it would be, but they'll probably just won't pay taxes for a while. So it's like a net benefit for them. Ultimately, they've got to deal with the government for 40 years now with this whole little system of constantly just raking money off the American person, because like you have to pay that back, and even if you defer your student loans until after you get out of college, that could be 4 or 5 years. You gain interest on that loan, and then you still have to pay. You're still gaining interest as you pay it off, and a lot of people pay that off in 30 years. It's like a house mortgage. It's like damn. But it should technically be a net positive. But I'm liable to believe people like Robert Barnes who are more skeptical, because what might end up happening is that somehow the American taxpayer is going to cover this charge. That is likely to happen because they'll. That is the problem. That's the benefit of this thing. Because what's probably going to happen, because the government's evil and they do all kinds of things. What's probably going to happen? The debt's going to be forgiven. They're going to charge the government for a certain amount of money. They're going to get that money, and then they're going to get the tax break for the loss of revenue, because they can write off like, hey, you forgave $200 million worth of revenue. We would make $100 million off of interest in 10 years. And then, so they're going to get a tax break for probably like 5 years. And then on top of that, they're going to charge the government for $100 million. So it's like, either way, like the taxpayer probably going to get fucked in this. But theoretically, just observing this situation from a neutral place, just like how it mechanically ought to function, this should be a net positive for the American people. A lot of people don't like understand how like some of the stuff works. And again, the government does what it wants, and and the people who lobby it very well, and the people who pay for the corruption, very well get paid back. Like, you put $1 in, you're getting 1,000 now. You're not. It's not. Government's pretty cheap. It's pretty cheap to bribe the government. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on that. It shouldn't cause inflation. It actually should cause deflation. It should be, again, a net benefit for every American. But it's probably going to. I just wanted to put that idea out there because I know a lot of people are out there like just losing their damn minds, and it's like, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's not going to cause hyperinflation because, again, we just put $4 trillion in, and look what happened when we put $4 trillion in. If we put another 600, like we gave like how many 500, 600 billion to Ukraine over the last 10 years or something like that. Like we just keep throwing this money out there. It's like the amount of money this is small enough that's not going to cause hyperinflation. It probably will cause inflation, but it's not going to cause hyperinflation. And it's just, people need to just take a chill pill. Yes, Joe Biden's a terrible person. Yes, the diary and the laptop are real, but holy moly, you've got to just take it back and think logically about things. Again, this should be a net positive if things work the way they're supposed to work. But they don't work the way they're supposed to work. All right, well, thank you for joining me on this little podcasty rant. Thank you for your time, for listening. If you made it all the way, know that I appreciate you, and I got more content on the way. Otherwise, thank you for checking in, and I will see you soon.